Howdy everyone. I'd like to start today by clarifying that I do not hate the person that I am talking about here. Please don't dogpile his channel, all 7 of you, with hate or anything. This is a sincere, good faith criticism. I'm actually a fan of this guy and most of the content he produces. However, my word and what I say is only as good as your trust in it. You don't know what my true intentions with this video actually are. You can't know what I'm thinking. That technology just doesn't exist. All we can do to find out what I actually believe is work with what we have. Now, how do we do that? Well, we look at the tangible things that I've said and done and the effects that those things have on the world, and make a reasonable inference from that. And while we can't know for sure, this is very often a good indication of what I very likely believe, and we can attribute consequences based on the real-world effects of my actions. This is a similar process to how our justice system works, with a little bit of racism sprinkled in. Just something to store in your brain wrinkles for the time being. Anyway, I recently saw a podcast from a YouTube channel called Sanpelli, which featured a YouTuber that I'm a fan of. This YouTuber is Alex O'Connor, who runs the YouTube channel CosmicSkeptic. The CosmicSkeptic channel uploads videos about mostly philosophy and religion, and more recently about veganism in particular. He does debates, public speaking, and just general conversations with many other channels such as Rationality Rules. His videos are in general very well worded, researched, justified, and just straight up entertaining and fun to watch. I used to watch this guy's videos religiously, ironically, when I was younger. If you find yourself attracted to this type of content, I seriously recommend you check his videos out, link in the description. As a result of this, Alex boasts a channel with over 300,000 subscribers, so I'm punching a bit above my weight here with my 7. But Sam's channel is a little more my size, a little bit, with his 100 or so. As always, please check the first link in the description to check that I'm not misrepresenting any of these arguments. I'll also leave timestamps, just so you can check that I'm not taking these things out of context. There are some takes of his that I find myself disagreeing with though, and these are often some, not all, of his claims regarding free speech. According to his Twitter bio, Alex is a free speech absolutist, and this stance generally refers to an inalienable right to have, hold, and share your own opinions, speech, and beliefs without being criminalized or punished by law, regardless of the content of this speech. This is a stance that a lot of people have, and Alex is no different here. As a preface to this, I do like the concept of free speech. I do think that free speech is a good and important thing that a society needs to have to survive. However, my first critique of Alex is how he justifies free speech absolutism.
The common trope on this, I think, is people will say, we need free speech because it's the only way to make sure that bad ideas are countered.
This idea that bad ideas will be countered exclusively by rational discourse is an understandable position to come to. The number 1 article that comes up if you search free speech absolutism on Google shows the following article that explains this a few paragraphs down. This idea is one that in principle I agree with, but only if a slight caveat can be made to the premise. Free speech and discourse is the only way that bad ideas can be weeded out, provided that everyone in the discussion is talking in good faith. So, if everyone is coming to the discussion with their own opinions that they believe, and will dispose of those ideas if they're refuted successfully and factually, then sure, the worst ideas will be weeded out and discarded, and only the better ideas will be considered as truthful. However, within some spheres of discourse, namely the more polarized ones, namely the political discourse in particular, this isn't often the case. A lot of the political beliefs that we all hold, regardless of whether it's intended or not, are held primarily based on how we feel emotionally about them, rather than whether they're supported by the data and evidence. One such slightly less politically divided example that I want to bring up is climate change. Some videos on this website, youtube.gov, are being put forth by sources such as Prager University, whose videos make varyingly unscientific points that fall apart to scrutiny, yet reach millions and convince tens of thousands. And I could spend hours debunking these claims about climate change, but a few people have already done that. If you want to see that, check out H1 guys, see the link below for a takedown of these ideas. The problem lies in the fact that Prager University, which got a lot of its early funding from oil fracking billionaires Dan and Ferris Wilks, and who still sit at the board in charge of Prager University, has a large conflict of interest. On the one hand, there's factual integrity. However, oil billionaires benefit from paying for this misinformation, and they instead do the latter, and produce these videos to sway public opinion. So, it's arguable, since we don't know for sure what they know and believe, remember, that they're educated on the matter, however they're deliberately acting in bad faith and lying about their beliefs in order to attempt to convince people of the incorrect facts to, I'm sure we can agree, the detriment of the world. So, the question we have to ask is, how do we deal with cases like this? And this is obviously a question that Alex is undoubtedly familiar with and has probably asked himself a few times before, to which Alex would likely argue, aha, let's destroy these ideas with fact, logic and reason, and then we'll weed them out of the discourse. However, this is the main point of contention I have with that. The people who tend to try and put forth this misinformation a lot of the time aren't really trying to appeal to people on the grounds of logic, reason and good faith debate. More often than not, they're putting forth anti-intellectual rhetoric to appeal to people's affects and intuition. This means that telling the average person in the audience, who if you're on a platform like YouTube won't necessarily be there just to learn, telling them that the way of thinking that seems to make sense to you is actually wrong, often won't sit very well to them. And despite the fact that your position is actually supported by science, you'll end up losing conviction. You'll end up being unable to weed out and counter the bad ideas. And since we've established before that people with the intent to spread this misinformation will often act arguably deliberately, they will and do see that this strategy works, and they'll often use tactics like this whenever they need to. This is the main reason why many quote-unquote SJWs turn to attempting to prevent these people from talking at college campuses, since a lot of the time these people are specifically spreading anti-scientific information, with an attempt to convince as many people as possible of their political leanings. More on that later. Instead, for the time being, I want to hone in on an interesting question that I feel is necessary to ask. What is considered as speech in relation to free speech? Is it speech to shout at someone? Is it speech to hand over the microphone? Let's take the following example, and this is borrowed example number 1. Imagine the phrase, I love you. If you say the words out loud right now, then it's okay, normal, maybe you directed it at your mum or something and she responded. Now, imagine a friend turned stalker of a girl, and every 10 minutes they text, I love you to this person. One of these most people would class as harassment, but the other one most people would not. The words are being said in different ways, even though the content is pretty much the same in both situations. Speech is more than the content of the words being said. It also includes what the act of saying these words does. And saying some words can do quite a lot of damage if you say them in exactly the wrong way. Firstly, there are some very radical belief systems that, if popularized socially and publicly elected, would actually lower the total amount of freedom of speech that exists. The key question is, should these belief systems be allowed to be broadcast by nature of freedom of speech? These ideas are dangerous enough that should intervention by counter-protesters happen, it would be justified. This is similar to the paradox of tolerance, and this is borrowed example number 2. If you want to create the maximum amount of tolerance in a system, then do you tolerate the intolerant? If not, then you're not being very tolerant towards them. But if you do, then you're allowing intolerant people into your system, and if they gain a foothold, which they very likely do, there is a link in the description to explain how that happens, you're risking more intolerance. As a result, I personally would argue that you realistically have to draw a line somewhere. So, a small amount of intolerance towards those who would end up making the system more intolerant is often necessary. And yet, the free speech absolutist approach, by design, can't draw that line. I'd like to further this point with another example, and this is borrowed example number 3. Let's imagine a society in which instead of free speech, everyone absolutely loves the idea of free driving. Everyone is told about cars, everyone's taught how to drive in school, and when everybody reaches the age of 15, they're given a free government car to drive wherever they want. However, there are a lot of people in this system whose enjoyment of driving comes from the ability to drive 100 miles an hour down varyingly busy roads. However, if they're pressed on it, they will come to the defense that the society defends free driving. Now, this is obviously a health and safety hazard, and if they end up crashing, it ends up decreasing the safety of people they might hit. Should there be a speed limit for the roads people drive on to protect the safety of the people that are put in danger? Or should these people's love of driving outweigh the possible and likely danger towards the affected people? Let's take the example one step further. Say there are people whose enjoyment seems to come from crashing into people very lightly on fast roads. Again, this is a much more immediate hazard, but it's harder to pass on consequences. Should these people be reprimanded for their actions? What if nobody gets hurt? What if everybody gets hurt? What if the person who crashed said the action was accidental and that they just wanted to drive 100 miles per hour down a varyingly busy road. We can't know for sure whether someone's telling the truth in their intent. We can only make a reasonable inference based on the actions that took place after all. Do we believe them? Or do we act with precaution and punish them accordingly toward the effect their action had on the outside world? My intent, if it wasn't clear already, is to draw parallels in this hypothetical world between acts of driving that are potentially very dangerous and acts of speech that are potentially very dangerous. I would therefore argue that in these situations, that some level of monitoring of free driving to ensure that people aren't allowed to crash into other individuals allows the most people to drive with the most freedom. And we can translate this into the concept of free speech. I thought I'd clarify this here, by the way, but my goal with this video is not to make a moral objectivist argument. I don't want to dig myself into or out of that hole. I'm merely arguing from the perspective of assuming that we agree that these belief systems, that if popularized socially and publicly elected, would actually lower the total amount of freedom of speech, are bad, and therefore arguing from a consequentialist perspective what I feel ought to be done about these problems. So the next point that Alex makes that I'm going to go over is in relation to whether deplatforming actually works. Alex takes the stance of no, and cites Alex Jones as his example.
Being taken off all platforms, and he's just increased his hatred towards the media, I would say.
Yeah, and it like it validates what he's saying. You know, it's
yes,
like, if you take his platform and you get rid of it, then, like you say, you amplify him to the extent that it's no longer just people listening to him who agree with him. I mean, he was just on Joe Rogan.
This effect is one that makes sense on paper, and the Streisand effect is very real. But if you analyze the scenario itself in its entirety, this effect doesn't represent the situation quite as much as it first seems. Alex Jones was removed from YouTube, but then right after that, searches for the guy's YouTube channel skyrocketed. After this, he appeared on Joe Rogan, and as a result, his ideas were showcased to a bunch of people that otherwise wouldn't see his content. Alex Jones, however, is a bit of a weird example. First off, Alex Jones is naturally a very eccentric person. He's the type of person that, regardless of whether people agree with him or not, is very easy to know. There's only one person that could be referred to as Alex Jones. This is a man who, regardless of being deplatformed, would have been invited on Joe Rogan. He's been on Joe Rogan before, after all. Now, this is not to say that the act of banning him from YouTube hasn't been some sort of publicity to him. Just that what happened in this case is that Alex Jones is much more of the exception rather than the rule. This next argument is, of course, a lot easier to make a year or two after the fact. I have the benefit of the passage of time on my hands after all. But up to now, in the year of our Lord 2020, Alex Jones is largely unheard of on YouTube. Most videos uploaded in the past 4 weeks about him are getting very limited views. Alex Jones just isn't relevant on YouTube anymore. However, I understand that this information was hardly available over a year ago, and Alex Jones was still being talked about. But ultimately, the goal of deplatforming someone is to make sure that the harm done by their speech will be inevitably decreased in the long term. And in that regard, it works very well. Better examples to make here, I would say, are Milo Yiannopoulos, Sargon of Akkad, although he did eventually get his YouTube channel reinstated, and more recently Stefan Molyneux and Richard Spencer. These figures were barred from YouTube, and as a result, their audience numbers have rapidly decreased. There are many more examples of this, too many to name, but I'll put a few more on the screen right now. I'd like to end on the most important point, in that this deplatforming isn't being done on a legal level. College campuses are allowed to ask anybody they want to attend their faculty as a speaker, and are able to choose whose views they want to platform. Choose whose views. They also have a responsibility to protect their students, first and foremost, and if a lot of their students, particularly those in minority groups, are put into danger by other students who are thereby radicalized by people promoting harmful rhetoric to them, and not in an I'm triggered by your speech kind of way, but in a you're being openly hateful kind of way. Just figured I'd put this in here in post. Then that onus can be argued to be partly on the speakers, and thus the college's behalf. However, it is somewhat difficult to pinpoint the responsibility of the consequences in that sense, and a lot of these speakers will hide behind that difficulty to pinpoint responsibility in order to continue doing what they're doing. This act I'm referring to here is called stochastic violence. I'm not going to go into stochastic violence here, but this video has a lot of information on it if you're interested. Link in the down there part. Similarly, YouTube, first and foremost, is a media sharing company, and they're allowed to choose whose views they do or don't want to platform. A lot of these, typically far right, people being deplatformed are being banned off sites like YouTube not for breaking the law with their speech, but for breaking the terms and conditions they agree to upon signing up. A lot of people complaining about this, calling it censorship, seem to forget that part. Everyone seems to think that they're entitled to use these platforms regardless of what they have to say. Anyway, that does it for this video. I'm going to hopefully make some videos similar to this one, where I provide a more left-ish slant on some more moderate creators' content. If anyone has anything they want me to respond to, then let me know in the comments. Otherwise, please follow my socials in the description or on screen right now. So, for the end of this video, I'm going to talk about a few things that Alex believes that I agree with, and things that I like Alex for, because while it's devastatingly obvious that I'm using Alex for publicity as a crutch to talk about the concept of free speech absolutism, I want to try and clarify that I come at him with good faith. Now, I'm an atheist, and I think he's very good at bringing up tenets of religious philosophy, criticizing the arguments that these theologists make, and presenting his thoughts and ideas in understandable ways. I also like a lot of his stances on veganism, and he makes the topic very approachable and explains a lot of his stances much better than a lot of other angrier, veganism-oriented YouTubers. His presence in talks he does, and debates, and he does quite a lot of debates, is pretty great. He talks with conviction, and his speaking just emanates pure distilled rationality. There's a reason I had to talk about Alex's ability to word his points with conviction when I was introducing him. And Alex also talks about a lot of discussions that, whether I agree with his stance or not, always offer interesting perspectives that I either didn't think about myself, or presents arguments in interesting ways. His discussion on antinatalism, for example, is one that I recommend you watch, because he's much more knowledgeable about the area of discussion than I am. It's also just a very good video to watch, and I recommend you do it.